Ms. Smith has had a career working in the corporate, nonprofit, and public sectors. She served as the Chief of Staff for former Minneapolis Mayor R.T. Ryback and moved to Governor Dayton's office to become his Chief of Staff. In 2014, Governor Dayton named her as his running mate for a second term. Since starting as Lieutenant Governor in January 15, Ms. Smith has played an active role both behind the scenes and in the public promoting the governor's agenda to build a better Minnesota. As a former Chief of Staff in Minneapolis, Lieutenant Governor Smith is very aware of the powerful role that LGA plays in sustaining many of our cities. In Ely, for example, in the 2013 LGA reforms, that meant we were able to hold our levy flat, while at the same time completing construction of a new library and renovating our city hall. We would have not been. It's a beautiful library and city hall. If any of you ever want to come up, feel free, I will give you a tour. It's only 2 hours from here. We would have not been able to do any of these things without the increase in LGA at that time. Today she's been talking about the legislative session, its impact on Greater Minnesota, and what we might see during the next session. Our Lieutenant Governor, Tina Smith.
Thank you, everyone. You know, I have this theory that everything is a little bit like high school. And one of the things that, so this is why nobody is sitting in the front row, right? Yeah, oh, it's like church too, exactly, it's the same thing. Well, I want to just give a huge thank you to all of you for inviting me to be with you today, especially Heidi, I understand is your outgoing chair, and Bob, your incoming chair. I suggested that he was going to be getting coronated later today, and he was very unhappy with that analogy, so. We had a chance to get to know each other a little bit when I visited Le Sueur a little earlier this session to talk about transportation, so it's great to see you again. And Cynthia from, there you go, hello, great to see you too, and to all of the mayors here. I'm just so happy to be here. You know, as many of you know, I've been Lieutenant Governor Mayor Brady, who's like my partner in, I won't say partner in crime in Rochester, but partner for sure in Rochester. As many of you know, you probably know I've been Lieutenant Governor for a little over 7 months now, and it is an invigorating and humbling experience to do this. I will just tell you one quick story as an illustration of that. You may know that the Lieutenant Governor does not have a lot of formal job responsibilities, but one of them is to convene the State Senate on the first day of the new session. So I was quite excited. I went to the Senate floor and all the senators are coming in, and I've never been on the Senate floor, so it was a big deal for me. And I'm there early, of course, because I'm a chronically early person, and I'm chatting away with one of the sergeants at arms who is up in front as well, a guy named Gus, who is, I would say, easily 85 years old. It was his second career, being sergeant at arms. Anyway, so after we talked for a while, Gus looks at me and he says, so are you one of our new pages? And I said, oh no, I'm the new Lieutenant Governor. And of course he was like, oh, I'm so embarrassed, don't worry. And I was like, don't worry. You've never met me before, and besides, if you think I'm a page and I'm 56 years old, like this is a good day for me. So it was all good. Today I thought, as Heidi said, that I would just share my perspective on the legislative session just passed, and more generally sort of where I see Minnesota heading. But mostly I look forward to having an opportunity to kind of have some give and take with all of you and answer questions. So I will try not to talk too long so that we can have that opportunity and I have a chance to hear from you and what is on your mind. I've lived in Minnesota for over 30 years, and I've been Lieutenant Governor, as I said, for not very long. But in that time, I've seen a lot of stuff, especially since I've been Lieutenant Governor. And one of the things that I have seen is that Minnesota is a big, rich, complex state, and we can't be defined by one region or one economic sector or one demographic group. I mean, we are changing also very fast. I know as local elected leaders that you appreciate that as well as the governor and I do. Here are just a few numbers to kind of capture that change. By 2020, Minnesota will have more people older than 65 than school children. That's a first for Minnesota. The number of Minnesotans older than 85 will triple by 2050. And with regard to the diversity of our state, we are also, as you all know, becoming much, much more diverse. Right now, 3% of Minnesotans over 85 are people of color. But amongst kids that are 5 years old and younger, 30% of those Minnesotans are people of color. So things are changing, and this produces incredible opportunities for us. You know, numbers don't usually lie, but one of the great things for me about being lieutenant governor is being able to put down the spreadsheets and get out of town and hear what is happening in Minnesota firsthand from people. And we counted it up this morning. I have been to 56 communities in Minnesota since I became lieutenant governor 7 months or so ago. That does not count St. Paul, I want you guys to know, where I work every day. And I've had a chance to see the incredible richness of our state. Earlier this year, I had a chance to visit Roseau, and I talked with the general manager at Polaris. And I always ask business leaders, what is it that keeps you up at night? What do you worry about? And the most common answer I get is the answer that Dalton Pierce told me, which is a shortage of workers and a shortage of places for those workers to live. I visited Marshall, and business leaders there from Schwann's told me about the challenges that they have with Highway 23 and how the inadequacies of that transportation network for them is compromising the economic vitality of their business. Their mayors and chamber folks told me the exact same thing, that the public safety and economic vitality of their community is being hurt by the lack of investment in that transportation infrastructure. Mayor Dave from Granite Falls was there as well. And in Fergus Falls and Laverne and Virginia and Brainerd, small business owners and doctors and principals and community college leaders told me about how important broadband is for the economic vitality of their communities. If you want to attract and retain talent, if you want businesses to grow, if you want people to have excellent healthcare, you've got to have broadband. So these visits, of course, reinforced what the governor and I already know, what the challenges are that face this state. And I think they, of course, reinforce what everybody in this room already knows. My goal, and the governor's goal, is to create an economy in Minnesota, not us, but to have an economy in Minnesota that works for every single person. Whether they are living in the high-rises of Cedar Riverside between Minneapolis and St. Paul, or whether you're from North Minneapolis, or whether you're from Fergus Falls or Laverne, whether you are from Mountain Iron. That we need an economy that works for every single one of us. And we need to be honest with ourselves. We have not achieved this yet. We're doing better than most places, better than Wisconsin. But we have a long way to go, and we cannot be complacent. And I appreciate and respect so much the job that this organization has to advocate for communities in greater Minnesota, and I respect that. And the governor and I are determined to be great partners with you. And I know that we can work together on this. I also want to just say that I respect very much that you do not play into the greater Minnesota versus metro area dynamic, which is bad for our state and bad for our politics and bad for getting things done at the legislature. That was most notable this session when you wouldn't do that when it came to local government aid. So thank you for that. So this does bring me to last session. And I want to just say a few words about the last session. You know, in 2014, Minnesotans in their wisdom sent to the state capitol a divided government. And as a result, we had two very, very different philosophies about how to approach the state, what direction we want to go, where are we headed. And I say this without being partisan. I mean, it's an honest disagreement or an honest difference of opinion or different perspective on what direction we think we should go. You know, the governor and I believe that with a strong economy and a state budget surplus, that we have an opportunity to take big steps forward on education, on transportation, on economic development. We believe that so strongly. I mean, we believe that we have an opportunity with the unique strength of Minnesota's economy right now and educating our kids, making sure that preschool is available for every 4-year-old in whatever capacity. That'll help us close the opportunity gaps. that we have an opportunity and that we have a need to make sure that we invest in higher education, which is such an engine for economic growth in every place in the state. We believe that Minnesota needs a sustainable, comprehensive transportation plan to fix our roads and bridges and transit systems in every part of the state. And that's what we proposed in this last legislative session. You probably know that our proposal would have paid to fix more than 2,000 miles of roads and bridges, and 2,000 miles of local roads and state roads, 300 bridges, including local and state bridges, and $6 billion worth of investment. And I want to just say that, I want to be really clear that we understood and understand the value of adding support to our transportation system, our transportation proposal for cities under 5,000. And we would have insisted on including that in a final transportation package if there'd been a final transportation package. Governor and I wanted to continue the tuition freeze for our higher education systems. We believe in tax cuts for middle-class families. And we believe in, and we proposed $30 million in broadband for greater Minnesota communities, and $30 million for 1 year, because we were hoping that with a continued strong economy, we would be able to make an additional investment in the second year, understanding how important this is to the economy. And last, I just want to note that we offered a $1 billion public works bill so that we could get working on the vital infrastructure improvements that drive the vitality of regional centers in every part of the state. The House Republicans, I have to say, had a very different philosophy. And they fundamentally believe that government at all levels is too big, that it is inefficient, and that what we need to do is to figure out how to make cuts and also to give taxes back to Minnesotans. And it's just a fundamentally different proposal, a different approach. So, I think I know that you have all been talking about this, we know what happened in this session. What was promised to be a session of focusing on greater Minnesota, I think maybe deserves better the moniker of a session of missed opportunities. And it's a shame that happened, but I don't want to be too pessimistic because it's not my nature, and I believe that we have so much common ground here. I want to just note that on transportation, we did make headway in the sense that we developed a consensus understanding of what the need is for transportation in this state, how much it would cost, and what the need was. We were unable to come to an agreement on how to pay for it, so there's more work to be done. But that at least is some small glimmer of hope there. On workforce housing and workforce development, an issue that I know is so important to the people in this room and to the communities that you represent, the governor signed legislation investing an additional $2.7 million in Minnesota's adult and youth workforce grant program, and that's going to help Minnesotans with barriers to employment get jobs. And we also signed legislation investing another almost $2 million in new workforce development programs that are grants that go directly to employers, a priority of this organization's. We're also making $6 million in investments in workforce housing, which I think will be helpful all over the state. Last thing I want to say about the session and what happened here is that in 2015, of the bonding bill that passed, 78% of that money, $370 million, went to projects located in greater Minnesota or to projects with statewide significance. And we thought, considering the state's unmet needs, the cost of debt, the state's borrowing capacity, that we could have done more, but we'll work on that next session. So we have progress that has been made, but a lot more work to do. And I've come to say that in this session, the problem is that I'm impatient. I learned that patience is a virtue, but it is not my virtue. So with that in mind, I'd like to just give you 3 last kind of thoughts, and then I would be really delighted to hear what's on your mind and answer questions. The first is that I'm not going to sugarcoat the fact that we don't always agree on everything. And as I was saying, I think, to Heidi when we were out front, good partners know how to be clear about what they agree on as well as what they don't agree on, and then figure out how to come to terms with that. I value that honesty, and I pledge to you that you will always have that from me. That's what good partners do. The second thought I want to leave you with is that I really also truly believe that we have so much more in common than we have disagreements around. You know, before, as you heard, before I became Lieutenant Governor, I was the Chief of Staff for Minneapolis's outstanding Mayor, R.T. Ryback. And I learned a lot about working in local government. One of the things that I learned is that while City Hall politics can be complicated, they are rarely partisan. And there's no partisanship in figuring out how to fill a pothole or figure out how to make your water system work or how to deliver public safety. It's about solving problems. So I suggest to you that those of us in this room share that perspective. It is the most Minnesotan of perspectives, that if we work hard and we listen to each other, we will solve problems. That leads to the third thought, which is that I do not believe that we live in a zero-sum world. There's a perspective amongst some in the capital that we live in a world of scarcity, and that we need to lower our expectations, and rather than striving for big things. And I just completely and categorically reject that framework. I think it's short-sighted, and I don't think it leaves room for the imagination and the inventiveness that is at the heart of what makes Minnesota so exceptional. And this is what Minnesota is all about. People living in this amazing part of the world invented the first autopilot that was used in World War II. We engineered a new process to turn low-grade iron ore into taconite, thereby saving an economy of the Iron Range in Minnesota. Minnesota developed advances in agriculture that feed the world. We pioneered open heart surgery and pacemakers. We invented HMOs and supercomputers and wet-dry sandpaper and Post-it notes. We invented Harrelson apples and water skis and snowmobiles and snowblowers and winter hardy alfalfa. Not to mention Bisquick, Spam, and Twister. We invent things in this state. It is what makes us exceptional. And these inventions and so many others have made life better and more fun and healthier for millions of people around the world. And we have to ask ourselves, what is it about this state, relatively small population compared to the rest of the world, that induces so much invention, that creates so much invention? Well, if you think about it, invention requires the capacity to see possibility and connection and relationships where other people just see problems. And it requires the ability to see if something isn't working to say, okay, how can we make that work better? Inventors bring urgency and passion to their work. They are not satisfied. They are maybe not very patient. I just have to say that I saw this same spirit, this spirit of invention a little earlier today when I visited the farm of Lucy and Jason Onson just nearby. It's called Locally Laid Eggs. So they started out with a backyard flock of chickens. And 3 years later, barely 3 years later, they are now making, they're producing and branding local sustainable eggs with a distribution network that reaches all the way to Chicago. And what is incredible about their story is that it demonstrates how with some ingenuity and some hard work, that Minnesota spirit of invention, you can transform your own future and you can also transform the economy all around you. And I couldn't help but thinking, coming to talk to you today, also how it demonstrates the interconnectedness of greater Minnesota and the metro area. Because though they have intense distribution in and around their farm, the bedrock of their business is in the metro area. It is that that connection which makes the economy work in every part of our state. So the governor and I, we pledged to continue working with you. I know if the governor were here, what he would do is he would give out his cell phone number. Many of you probably already have it. But I'm going to give you mine. Because as mayors of communities across this city, Mayor Brady already has it, so he can give it to you if you don't get it written down. We ought to have a direct relationship with one another. And I would welcome that. My cell phone number is 612-747-7110. That's the phone I've got right here. If you guys want to try calling me, you can see. There is the movie version of F. Scott Fitzgerald's book It's called The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, and the title character in that movie remarks at one point, "Our lives are defined by opportunities, even the ones we miss." So in St. Paul, the opportunities that we miss affect the opportunities of every single person in this state. And I look forward to talking with you more about how we can have more progress and more goodness for the good of the whole in all of Minnesota. Thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing what's on your minds. Thank you. How's that? There we go.
Lieutenant Governor, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for
your
me.
comments. I need to share with everybody here that among the first few duties that were performed by the Lieutenant Governor were to bring, along with Dana McKenzie, $600,000 worth of broadband grants to the community of Fergus Falls. And it was one of the most welcome things that we've had happen in a very long time, and we truly appreciate the efforts that have come from the Governor's office along that line as well.
Thanks, Mayor.
One of the big concerns that we all share is local government aid. And you mentioned the importance of it to the entire state, that it makes it possible for those of us in so-called greater Minnesota affordable places to live. It gives us the opportunity to provide the services of safety and everything else that our citizens need so that we can have a decent quality of life. We suffered greatly through unallotment with Governor Pawlenty, who reduced us to our knees on a number of different things. We lost personnel, we cut services of all kinds, mostly in the safety area, as well as fire, police, and our streets suffered, our libraries have suffered, and we have not come back from that great loss. What we are hoping that the Governor will do, and let me say, we greatly appreciate the initial response that Governor Dayton gave to bringing back some of the funding. It's given us the opportunity to stabilize the formula, and we've been able to get back some of the services, some of the personnel that we need to run efficient cities. But we're not there yet, and not having any improvement, and we need, we think, approximately $45.5 million to get back to the level that we were in 2002. And we aren't even close to getting there yet, and we're wondering if the Governor is willing to bring forward LGA into the supplementary budget.
Well, thank you, and let me just say I had such a blast visiting Fergus Falls, and it's just a classic example of a great community. And I will get to your LGA thing, but I just want to tell everyone, there was this businessman who we visited with there who had moved from the Twin Cities to Fergus because it was the location of his wife's home family, right? And because of his access to broadband, he was able to basically run a commodities trading business out of the farmhouse that I think his wife's grandparents lived in, and do business all over the world, which is just such an example of the power of broadband to Minnesota's economy. On local government aid, I want to just say that it was a really, really good idea to do local government aid back when it was first created, because the idea was that all of our communities and the state, that we share in one another's successes as well as one another's challenges, and that there ought to be an even, a somewhat equivalent, at least, standard of service that Minnesotans can expect in their communities. And I mean, it was a miracle that I think a local, Lori will probably remember, there's been a lot written about the differences between Minnesota and how well we're doing in other parts, and local government aid was specifically called out as one of the innovations that we put forward, what was it, 71, I was thinking well over 30 years ago. I of course cannot speak for the Governor on what he will put in a supplemental budget bill. I can tell you right now that I think that the Governor has only begun to think about that. But I will take this back to him because, as I said, I understand from having worked in local government myself, that there is, local governments are dealing with just numbers, the laws of finances. The costs go like this, and revenues either keep up with costs or services get cut. And many of you, I'm sure in your communities, have seen dramatic increases in property taxes to try to fill that gap. And that, that's not a good thing either. So I will take that back to him, and this LGA curve that went down like this for so long, I mean, I'm proud that we were able to get it going back up a little bit, but I appreciate that cities still have really significant financing challenges, and so, by the way, do schools. And we have spent a lot of effort in this last legislative session to address that issue for our school districts as well.
Thank you so very much.
Come on, this is not a shy crowd.
You guys, well, no, you guys have been here for a day and a half. It's the afternoon of the second day. How do you?
Hi there, Pat Walsh from here in Laverne. Thanks so much for coming today to talk to our organization. I just want to let you know, Minnesota is a wonderful state for business to grow in, and as you know, being named by MSNBC about the #1 state in the nation for business development. Locally here we have a company that is owned by a businessman up in the Twin Cities. He could have taken that business and moved it across the border. He recognizes why he wants to keep that business in Minnesota because of the quality employees. That company was grown and made where it is today because of the quality employees in Minnesota. And now he is expanding on that business in Minnesota, not moving it because of our workforce. So we do have positives. The people that do move over to South Dakota, they choose to move because of greed, not because of the tax policy. It's pure greed. We have many more that stay in Minnesota. I work in South Dakota. I choose to live in Minnesota because I was born and raised here, and it's a great state. So don't take some of that information the wrong way, but we have growth in Minnesota, and we are feeling it in Minnesota. And to reiterate the LGA cuts, being a councilman and mayor for the last 12 years, I saw the LGA cuts that we took. We feel that the budget of Minnesota was balanced on the back of cutting LGA for 8 years, and I experienced every one of those years in the services that we had to cut, the public works employees that we had to cut, the budgets. It was a disaster for greater Minnesota, and so we are seeing that aid come back up, and I can't urge your support enough to have the governor put that $45 million back and get it back to the 2002 level.
Thank you for your comments, and it reminds me of I had a chance to visit a company in St. Cloud called, it's the Greedy Foundry, and so they make heavy, they forge heavy auto parts for trucks, and one of their customers made the decision to move that business to Mexico a couple of years ago, and within 2 years they brought the business back, because the quality of the workmanship, the quality of the product that we were able to produce in St. Cloud was just better. And so you are so right. I mean, our competitive advantage is the people that we have in this state, and we need to make sure that we don't lose that advantage by failing to appreciate how important education is. And I hear your point on local government aid, so thank you very much.
Anybody else? Come on. Okay. Great.
Hi, I'm Craig Clark, administrator from Austin. I saw today's Star Tribune, you announced a $100 million project for the Fort Snelling project in housing. Workforce housing is a particularly vexing problem in greater Minnesota, encouraging job growth as well as incentivizing work, in my opinion. That project, it says in the article anyway, was 190 units, so that my calculation, $526,000 per unit. Do you think, as far as workforce housing, I think we're looking at a much more per unit modest proposal. Is that something you think the governor could support moving forward so that we can help grow our communities?
Thank you for that. And that is a really interesting project. It is renovating and restoring those historic buildings on Fort Snelling, which at Fort Snelling, which is, it's going to be really exciting. I want to just be really clear though, I think it's a little bit confusing in that article. Nobody in this room should think that we're putting $100 million of state money into those projects, that it's a combination of historic tax credits and private development money and also some bonds from MHFA that will make that project possible. And of course it's very expensive because of the those historic buildings. So, but having said that, this question of workforce housing is really, really vexing to so many communities. It's actually not only in greater Minnesota, but it's also a challenge in the metro area. That housing there, I think, is you have to have an income of no more than $60,000. And for most Minnesotans, you know, it's not 16, but 60. For most Minnesotans, $60,000 is a very decent income. I think it was actually the mayor of Fergus Falls who did the best job of explaining to me, there you are, the challenges with workforce housing and just the fundamental gap between the cost of producing these units and the amount of money that the banks are willing to loan to build those buildings and how you fill that gap. And you well know that in this last legislative session, though not all of our priorities got passed, that we decided, that the governor decided to put a priority on so-called affordable housing. But I honestly think that sometimes the line between affordable housing and workforce housing is I don't know how meaningful a line that it is. And I don't know if there's anybody from Roseau here or Thief River Falls, but what would be the cost of a so-called workforce housing in those communities today? What would be what's the median income in those communities? And would a house, or excuse me, an apartment unit that that somebody could be eligible for who is making about $60,000, would that apply? I think it's hard to figure out exactly where to invest the resources that we have, because it's true, we do have limited resources. But I pledge, along with the governor, to continue to work with you all on this, because I appreciate that it's a big challenge. And if you're in, it was in Roseau, I think, where I was told that by the folks at Polaris that they're having to bus people up for short stints of work because they just don't have enough place for everybody to live. And that is not a sustainable strategy. We've got to figure this out.
One more question?
Okay. Yep. Right.
Rod Speedo, Fergus Falls City Council. I want to thank you for the emphasis that you put on our developing trails, caring for our waterways, and this great resource that we have that we continue to develop for tourism, and it's really a boon for greater Minnesota. And I just want to encourage, strengthen your hand and the governor's hand in what's going on with the legacy funding and continuing to work to let those funds regionally, benefit greater Minnesota, because that is crucial. I'm just saying, we come from the county with the most lakes in the whole nation, so woohoo! And we appreciate that, but we also have a world-class river there. And being the playground for Fargo-Moorhead area, we look forward to the continued support of that greater Minnesota trails, and river lake development. So thank you for your quality emphasis there.
Thank you so much.
That's great. Okay. Anybody else? Last chance. Okay. Thank you very much, Lieutenant Governor. We really appreciate you coming.
Thank you so much, everyone.